Jack stepped off the plane with a hesitation that hadn't been there 50 years earlier. The heat hit him immediately, thicker than he remembered, humid and pungent with the scent of damp earth and the city's new industrial breath. Saigon, now called Ho Chi Minh City, was no longer the war-torn place of smoke, sirens, and gunfire from his youth. It pulsed with life, chaos, and motion. But beneath the modern sheen, Jack could still feel it. The echoes. He clutched the worn leather bag slung over his shoulder. Inside was everything he needed for this trip, a few clothes, a journal, a packet of old letters, and one black and white photograph. 2 boys in muddy fatigues. One with a toothy grin and a peace sign. The other, Jack, more reserved, holding his helmet at his side, eyes already tired. Miguel had that kind of energy that made people believe they were going to make it. That kind of light didn't belong in war. And yet that was where they met, Vietnam, 1968. Now, Jack had returned to a country he had once promised himself never to see again. The taxi driver didn't speak English, and Jack's Vietnamese was limited to a few broken remnants from his youth, xin chào, cam on, phrases learned out of necessity, not connection. As the city blurred past the windows, neon lights, scooters like a river of sparks, Jack felt a hollow drum inside his chest. This was not nostalgia. This was something deeper. Something unfinished. He hadn't told many people about the trip. His daughter knew, and she tried to talk him out of it. "Dad, you're 74. What are you expecting to find there?" He hadn't known how to answer then. But now, standing on the edge of the old world, he understood, he wasn't here to find something. He was here to let go. And yet, there was something he hoped for, a miracle, maybe. Closure. The past hadn't been buried. Not really. It lived in his bones. In the way he never talked about the war. In the way he flinched at sudden sounds. In the dreams that always ended the same way, darkness, shouting, then silence. And Miguel's face, slipping into shadow. He arrived at the small guest house in District 5, a quieter part of the city. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, handed him a key and said, "You here for long?" Jack smiled weakly. Just long enough. That night, Jack sat at the desk in his room, unpacking memories. He took out the photo, smoothing it against the wood grain. He traced Miguel's face with his finger. "Where the hell did you go, brother?" he whispered. The next morning, Jack woke early, jet-lagged and restless. He walked the streets as dawn painted the sky in soft peach and gold. The city stirred slowly, vendors setting up carts, children in uniforms heading to school, elders practicing Tai Chi in parks. It was so peaceful. Almost too peaceful, considering the blood once spilled on this soil. He took a bus to the War Remnants Museum, not because he needed to see it, but because he owed it to himself. It was a stark, gut-wrenching place. The photographs hit him like blows, napalm victims, soldiers crying over fallen comrades, children with vacant eyes. Jack stood before one image, a chopper lifting off a jungle clearing, soldiers scrambling beneath it, and felt a cold sweat rise. He didn't know if it was the same day. But it might as well have been. They all blurred into one long scream. Outside the museum, he sat on a bench beneath a banyan tree. An old woman sold bottled water nearby. She smiled at him gently, sensing his heavy silence. "You are from America?" she asked in hesitant English. Jack nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "You were soldier?" He nodded again. She placed a hand to her chest. "My brother, not come home." Jack looked down. "Mine neither." It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Not to family. Not to friends. Not even to his wife, when she was alive. Miguel wasn't just a comrade. He was the best part of Jack that had been left behind. Back at his guest house, Jack opened the journal. The pages were blank. He hadn't written anything yet. But now, the words started to come. March 3rd, Ho Chi Minh City. 50 years ago, I left something here. Someone. His name was Miguel Ramirez. And I'm here to find out what happened to him. Not because I think he's still alive. But because I need to remember him, not just how he died. But how he lived. The next day, Jack would head north, toward the Central Highlands. Toward the jungle. Toward the place they last saw each other. Toward a memory that had never faded. But for now, he closed his journal and held the photo one more time. The edges were frayed, the surface scratched, but the smile on Miguel's face remained. There was still hope in it. The year was 1968, and the jungle was alive with the sounds of war. Jack was 22 years old when he first met Miguel Ramirez. They were both part of the 1st Cavalry Division, deployed deep in the Central Highlands of South Vietnam, a place where time moved slowly but bullets moved fast. The days were long, soaked in sweat and adrenaline, and the nights were worse. Dark, quiet, haunted. Jack had arrived at the firebase straight from a forward operating base near Pleiku. Still new to the war, still adjusting to the stench of mildew, the itch of jungle rot, and the constant weight of his M16, he was quiet, observant, wary. He didn't trust easily. Then Miguel showed up, smiling like he was already on his way out. First time in the suck? Miguel asked, sliding down beside him on a sandbag wall, lighting a cigarette with the ease of someone who'd stopped being afraid. Yeah, Jack replied. You? Miguel laughed. Been here 3 weeks. I'm practically a local. Jack cracked a smile. It was the first one he'd managed in days. Miguel was from East LA. 2nd-generation Mexican-American. His accent was smooth, laid back, always joking. But underneath the surface, Jack quickly learned, Miguel was sharp, eyes always scanning, instincts honed. He had that rare ability to read a room, or a battlefield, before anyone else did. The two became inseparable. Not by choice, necessarily, but by the quiet, growing bond that forms when two people rely on each other to stay alive. In firefights, Miguel always had Jack's back. When the rain poured for days and soaked everything down to the bone, they laughed it off together. When letters from home arrived, or didn't, they shared stories and silence alike. Miguel carried a small photo of his little sister in his helmet, right under the padding. She's 10, he told Jack one night as they huddled in a foxhole. Brightest kid you've ever met. Always bossing me around. Says when I come home, I gotta teach her to ride a bike. You gonna? Jack asked. Damn right I am. They had plenty of those conversations, what they'd do when they got back. Jack wanted to study architecture. Build something real. Miguel joked about opening a taco truck, but you could tell he meant it. Underneath the laughter, there was fear. They just didn't say it. Saying it made it real. Their squad was assigned recon patrols in the jungle beyond the firebase. Thick vegetation, steep terrain, and enemy contact every other day. The nights were the worst, trails of flares burning overhead, the echo of distant gunfire, the buzz of insects rising like a chorus of ghosts. One night, their patrol was ambushed. They'd just crossed a shallow creek, the moonlight glinting off the water, when gunfire exploded from the trees. Chaos. Screaming. Jack dropped to the ground, returning fire, crawling through mud and brush. He heard Miguel yelling, somewhere to his left, but couldn't see him. They called in air support. Minutes passed like hours. Then the chopper came in low, spitting dust and noise and light. Jack was pulled on board by someone's arm, he never knew whose, and thrown into the belly of the bird, disoriented, bleeding from a graze to his shoulder. Miguel, he shouted over the roar. Where's Miguel? No one answered. The door gunner just shook his head. Back at base, Jack waited. Hours turned to days. No one could confirm what happened. Some said Miguel went down. Others said he was captured. There was no body, no dog tags. Nothing. Just silence. Jack wrote Miguel's family. A letter he folded and unfolded 100 times. He didn't know what to say. "Your son was the best of us," he wrote. "I don't know where he is. But I promise I didn't leave him behind." He never sent it. The war dragged on. Jack finished his tour, made it home, but left pieces of himself behind. Pieces only Miguel had seen. And Miguel, whether dead, captured, or lost, was always there. In the margins of Jack's life. In the smell of rain, the sudden crack of thunder, the sound of helicopters in movies. In the way he avoided certain topics at the dinner table. In his dreams. There was one dream that returned often. Jack and Miguel sitting under a canopy of bamboo, watching fireflies, waiting for dawn. Miguel would turn and say, "We'll make it home, brother. You'll see." And Jack would nod. Then wake up crying. He kept the photo. Tucked it in his wallet. Folded and faded, it traveled with him through college, through marriage, through fatherhood. Miguel's grin never changed, even as Jack aged. Even as his hair grayed and his hands shook more than they used to. He tried looking up records over the years. VA offices, veteran forums, archived lists. Miguel's name was there, MIA. No updates. No resolution. Just 3 letters that might as well have been a death sentence. And yet, something in Jack had refused to believe it. Now, in Vietnam once again, those memories didn't feel like they belonged to a different life anymore. They were with him, all around him. Every street, every face, every distant rustle in the trees. He could hear Miguel's laugh again. Could feel that unspoken promise between them, "We go in together. We come out together." Only this time, Jack was going back in alone. But maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't be coming out alone. The memory of that night, the night everything changed, was something Jack had never truly escaped. It always started the same, the jungle breathing around them, heavy and close, 1,000 shades of black and green. Crickets chirped in a chaotic rhythm. The sky was a blanket of stars, but beneath the canopy, it was pure darkness. They were deep into their patrol, 2 squads fanned out along a ridgeline. There had been radio chatter about enemy movement. Nothing confirmed. Miguel had taken point that night. Jack followed close, his eyes scanning the shifting shadows. The men barely spoke. Every crunch of a boot, every click of a branch, sounded like a siren in their ears. The silence was not peace. It was a trap, and they all felt it. Then came the whistle, sharp, high, unmistakable. Mortars. The first shell landed just yards from their formation, throwing dirt and shrapnel in a thunderous plume. The second followed almost immediately. Screams tore through the air as the jungle lit up in flashes of red and yellow. "Contact front," someone yelled. Gunfire erupted from the trees. Jack dropped and rolled, heart pounding in his ears. He could barely see, barely breathe. He fired toward the muzzle flashes, trying to orient himself. In the chaos, he caught sight of Miguel, just a flicker, rushing to pull a wounded man back behind a log. Then a deafening crack, a landmine, or maybe a grenade, and everything went white. When Jack came to, he was face down in the mud. The rain had started. His ears rang with a high-pitched scream that wasn't anyone's voice, just the aftershock of noise. He reached for his rifle. It wasn't there. He reached for Miguel. Nothing. He staggered toward the direction he thought he'd last seen him, screaming his name. Miguel. Miguel. But there was no answer. Just smoke. Gunfire in the distance. A red flare cutting through the trees. Medevac choppers began their descent. Jack was pulled away by 2 medics, he didn't even remember them arriving. He fought them, cursed, screamed for Miguel. They wrestled him onto the stretcher. The last thing he saw before the chopper doors closed was the jungle swallowing itself in silence. No one could find Miguel afterward. Jack gave every detail he could, marked coordinates, retraced steps with the CO. A few others were recovered, wounded or dead. Miguel wasn't among them. There was talk, maybe he was blown clear. Maybe he was taken prisoner. Maybe he ran. No, Jack had shut that down immediately. Miguel didn't run, he'd said flatly. He'd never leave a man behind. They'd listed him as missing in action. Mia. 3 letters. So much weight. Jack spent his final weeks of deployment in a haze of grief and rage. He volunteered for more patrols. He took unnecessary risks. He wanted answers, or maybe revenge, but all he got was silence. The war didn't stop to grieve. When he boarded the Freedom Bird home, Jack carried no celebration. Only absence. Back in the States, he walked into a different world. The protests, the politics, the confusion, it all felt alien. He was 19 hours from the jungle, but part of him was still there, ducking through trees, listening for the whisper of death in the leaves. He didn't tell anyone about that night. Not really. Not even when the nightmares came, or when he found himself standing in the kitchen at 3 a.m., heart racing like he was still under fire. His wife would wake and ask, "Jack. You okay?" "Yeah," he'd always say. "Just thirsty." Years passed. The details blurred, but the moment, Miguel disappearing into the jungle, never faded. It wasn't just about loss. It was about unfinished business. The not knowing. The helplessness. Jack had buried friends before. But he'd never been denied the chance to say goodbye. That, more than anything, had shaped the next 5 decades of his life. Every Veterans Day, Jack stood at the memorial wall in his town, fingers brushing the cold stone, scanning the names he knew too well. Miguel's wasn't there, but Jack felt him in every syllable. Every silence. And that silence grew heavier with time. He started to avoid reunions. The other guys talked about the war like it was something they could compartmentalize, turn into stories and jokes and beer. Jack couldn't. Not with Miguel's face still etched into every corner of his memory. Then, one day, he opened an old footlocker and found the letter he'd never sent. Mrs. Ramirez. I served with your son, Miguel. He was the bravest man I knew. I wanted you to know that he looked out for us like a big brother. He kept me sane. The night he disappeared, we were ambushed. I saw him last trying to pull another soldier to safety. I don't know what happened after that. I was evacuated before I could find him. I'm sorry I couldn't bring him home. I think about him every day. Your son was a hero. Jack. The ink was faded, but the pain was fresh. That was the moment everything shifted. Jack sat with the letter for hours. Then he picked up the photo. Then his journal. Then his computer. He began searching. Veterans forums. Vietnamese databases. Anything. Most threads were dead ends. But he found a message board for recovered MIA cases, and one particular entry stood out. A local Vietnamese elder in the Central Highlands had spoken years ago of tending to an injured American soldier in the late 60s. It wasn't much. But it was enough. Jack booked a flight 2 weeks later. He didn't know what he'd find. But he knew what he was looking for. Not vengeance. Not even closure. Just a face. Just a name. Just a truth that had waited far too long in the shadows. The road to the Central Highlands was nothing like Jack remembered. Back in 1968, they traveled in convoys, jeeps, armored personnel carriers, the heavy hum of diesel engines and the constant tension of eyes on the tree line. Now, he sat in the back of a small van, winding up narrow roads lined with lush, endless green. The jungle was still here, but it had softened. The sharp edges of war had dulled into quiet beauty. Banana trees swayed lazily. Children waved from the roadside. The land had grown back. But Jack hadn't. The driver's name was a man in his 50s with a gentle voice and a calm presence. He spoke broken English, and Jack's Vietnamese was worse, but they found common ground in patience. "You soldier, yes?" and asked as they passed a marker near Buon Ma Thuat. Jack nodded. "A long time ago. You come for memory?" Jack paused. That wasn't how he'd thought to phrase it, but yes. That was exactly it. He came for memory. For a name he hadn't spoken in decades, and a face he still saw in every shadow. They reached the village by early evening. It was small, more like a cluster of homes around a central road, flanked by jungle and rice fields. The people here were wary at first. Americans didn't often come this far out, and certainly not old ones carrying dusty maps and folded photographs. And made introductions. Jack showed the photo of Miguel, the only one he had, along with a printed page he translated into Vietnamese explaining who Miguel was, the unit he served in, and where he'd disappeared. A few older villagers nodded thoughtfully, whispering to each other. One man stepped forward. He was in his 80s, skin like parchment, eyes sharp despite his age. And translated, he says, maybe he remembers. There was man, injured, in forest, near fire line. Many years ago. Jack's heart skipped. He leaned forward. Was he taken to a hospital? The man shook his head. No hospital. Hidden in house. Quiet. Jack stared. He survived. The man exchanged words with an again. He says he doesn't know what happened after. The man could not walk. He was young. Brown skin. Wounded badly. He was fed. Cared for. Then, he was gone. In the night. Gone where? The old man could only shrug. Hope was a fragile thing. Jack felt it bloom and break all in the same breath. Still, this was more than he'd had in 50 years. He clutched the photo tightly, thanking the man with quiet reverence. That night, he sat under a canopy near the guest house, the jungle whispering around him. A small fire flickered in a clay pit. And handed him tea. "You think your friend alive?" he asked softly. Jack looked into the fire. "I don't know. Vietnam, not same war now," and said. "But memories, always here." He tapped his chest. "Some people never come back, even when body returns." Jack nodded slowly. "And some never left, even when they went home." He opened his journal, fingers trembling as he wrote. March 6, Central Highlands. Today I saw a glimpse. A man who remembered Miguel. Said he helped him. Said he fed him. That means Miguel survived the ambush. At least for a while. I don't know if I should feel peace or pain. But for the first time in decades, I feel something real. Maybe memory is its own kind of resurrection. In the morning, Jack woke early and walked the outskirts of the village. The mist clung low to the ground, curling around the roots of trees like fingers unwilling to let go. He stood at the edge of the jungle, the same type of terrain he had once crawled through with a rifle, terrified and 22. "Are you out there, Miguel?" he whispered. "Did you make it?" A boy passed by with a bundle of kindling on his shoulder and looked up at Jack curiously. Jack nodded in greeting. The boy smiled. In that smile, he saw something achingly familiar, open, fearless, alive. Miguel would have liked this place. Maybe, just maybe, he did like it. Later that day, and took Jack deeper into the hills, where a small community of Montagnard people lived, an ethnic minority that had been caught between the Americans and the Viet Cong during the war. They had helped U.S. forces often, and many of their stories had gone untold. Here, Jack met a woman who remembered her father speaking of a foreign soldier, who stayed with them briefly before vanishing. "He was kind," she said. "Very sick. He taught my brother English words." Jack clung to every detail. Could it have been Miguel? He didn't want to assume, but he couldn't ignore the signs. As the sun set, they walked through the village, where pigs and chickens roamed freely, and laughter echoed from simple homes. Jack closed his eyes and imagined Miguel here, injured, yes, but safe. Teaching children words in English. Laughing. Healing. Even if he never left the village. Even if he died here. It would mean he hadn't died in the mud, alone. It would mean Jack's promise hadn't been broken. He stopped by a small shrine, candles flickering in front of faded photos of ancestors and lost ones. Quietly, he knelt, pulled Miguel's photo from his shirt pocket, and placed it at the base. He lit a stick of incense and whispered, "I didn't forget you, brother. I came back. I kept my word." For the first time in over 50 years, he felt the silence lift. Not completely. But enough. The next morning, Jack stood at the edge of the village, looking into the dense trees. It was the jungle he knew, not from maps or faded memory, but in his bones. Every leaf, every root, every shadow felt like a whisper from another life. He hadn't planned to go in. But standing there, something pulled at him. Maybe it was hope. Maybe guilt. Maybe the need to finally stand in the place where it all happened and face it directly. And approached quietly. "You want to walk?" he asked. Jack nodded. Just for a while. They took a narrow trail used by villagers gathering herbs and bamboo. The jungle wrapped around them quickly. The air was thick, moist, filled with the sound of cicadas and birdsong. Jack's boots crunched softly over fallen leaves, but his mind was decades behind, replaying footsteps from the past. He remembered the weight of the pack, the tension in every muscle, the way you never took your eyes off the tree line. Now, he walked slower, older, but no less alert. Some parts of the body never forget. A mile in, the path narrowed further, barely more than a game trail. And paused and pointed to a clearing ahead. "There," he said. "Old camp, long time ago. Maybe yours." Jack stepped into the clearing. It was small, 20, maybe 30 feet wide. Overgrown now, but he could still see the signs, flat areas where tents might have been pitched, a shallow depression that could have been a foxhole, the remnants of a rusted ration tin crushed into the dirt. This wasn't just jungle. This was a place they'd been. He knelt and placed his hand on the earth. The ground was warm. "This is where it happened," he said quietly. "Or close enough." The jungle didn't answer. But Jack didn't need it to. He stood and slowly walked the perimeter, reconstructing the night in his mind. The gunfire. The screaming. The chaos. The flare cutting through the darkness. And Miguel, pulling that wounded man to cover. He closed his eyes. "I was right here," he said to him. "He was over there. We were under fire. I tried to get to him." His voice caught. "I didn't make it." And watched silently. He knew enough not to interrupt grief when it was flowing. "I've carried this night with me for so long," Jack continued. "The guilt. The not knowing. I replayed it 1,000 times, thinking what I could have done different. But maybe." He looked up at the trees. "Maybe he didn't die here. Maybe he got a few more days. Maybe he found kindness in the middle of all this madness." They stood in silence for a long time. Finally, Jack reached into his pack and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. It was a small wooden cross, hand-carved back home, with Miguel's name etched into it. Beneath the name, he'd written, "Mi hermano. Always." He drove it into the ground near a tree, patting the soil down gently. "Rest here," he said. "Or wherever you went. Just know, I came back." He stepped back, and placed a single flower at the base of the cross. A bright red hibiscus. On the hike back, Jack didn't speak much. The jungle wasn't haunting anymore. It was humming. That night, back in the village, Jack received a knock on his door. It was the daughter of the Montagnard woman they had met earlier. She handed him a worn envelope, sealed with string. "He left this," she said. "We think for someone." Inside was a single piece of paper, aged and stained. Written in jagged, fading English. "To my friend. I don't know if you lived. If you ever come back, know I did not die angry. I was afraid, but I was helped. I saw people, kind people. I missed home. I missed my sister. But I thought of you. Always. Miguel." Jack's hands trembled as he read the letter again and again. It wasn't a complete answer. But it was enough. Enough to know Miguel survived the ambush. That he wasn't alone. That he thought of Jack before the end. That kindness had found him, even in the heart of the jungle. And for Jack, it changed everything. Not because it erased the pain, but because it gave it meaning. He stayed in the village for 3 more days. He helped a local carpenter fix a water pipe. He drank bitter tea with the elders and watched children race through the fields with wooden toys. He listened to stories in broken English and laughter in a language he didn't understand. He realized this place wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a healing ground. On his last day, Jack walked to the shrine where Miguel's photo still stood. He added the letter beside it, placing a smooth river stone to keep it from blowing away. Then he closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you. For surviving. For holding on. For waiting." As the sun rose, casting golden light through the trees, Jack felt something he hadn't in decades. Peace. He didn't have all the answers. But he had enough. The plane lifted gently from the runway in Pleiku, engines humming with a steadiness Jack hadn't felt in his own chest for years. He stared out the small oval window as Vietnam shrank beneath him, patches of jungle, rivers winding like veins through green, tiny villages tucked into valleys like secrets kept by the land. He hadn't said much on the ride to the airport. And had driven him one last time, hands steady on the wheel, eyes soft with understanding. Before parting, and handed him a small cloth pouch. "For memory," he said simply. Inside was a carved wooden amulet in the shape of a tiger, a symbol of strength and protection. Jack clutched it as the plane banked toward the east, carrying him back toward the world he'd left behind. But something had changed. Not in the land. In him. For 50 years, Jack had lived with a hollow space inside him, a wound that never quite closed. He had tried to fill it with silence, with distance, with duty. He'd built a life, raised children, even found joy. But always, beneath the surface, was Miguel. Unspoken. Unfound. Now, he was still unburied, but not lost. In Los Angeles, Jack's daughter, Elena, met him at the airport. She was in her 40s, a high school history teacher with her father's eyes and her mother's steadiness. She hadn't wanted him to go, had begged him not to travel alone. But now, as she wrapped her arms around him in the arrival hall, she whispered, "I'm proud of you, Dad." Jack closed his eyes. "I found him," he said softly. Her expression changed, curious, surprised, relieved all at once. But she didn't ask right then. She just held his hand as they walked to the car. Later, at home, he showed her the letter. She read it slowly, tears brimming. "You never told me about Miguel," she said. Jack nodded. "I couldn't. It hurt too much. But I thought of him every day. You said he was like a brother. He was. Better than a brother, maybe. In that kind of place, you find out who people really are. Elena looked up. And who were you? He chuckled quietly. Lost. Angry. A kid with a gun, trying not to fall apart. She smiled through her tears. Not anymore. That night, Jack pulled out a large photo album and began rearranging it. He added Miguel's picture to the first page. Below it, he glued a copy of the letter. Then, he wrote in clean block letters, Mi hermano. 1946 to 1968. The question mark wasn't just about uncertainty. It was about possibility. He began speaking at veterans groups soon after. For years, he'd sat quietly at the back, listening to others share their stories. Now, when he stood, he told them about Miguel, not just the night he disappeared, but the boy who made terrible coffee in their hooch, the man who taught Jack how to keep his boots dry, the friend who shared every cigarette and every silence with him. And he told them about Vietnam, not the war, but the place. The healing. The people who remembered Miguel. The old man with the sharp eyes. The children who smiled. The jungle that gave him back something sacred. Memory is a kind of resurrection, he said once. And forgiveness, it's not just for others. Sometimes, it's for yourself. He found that other veterans began opening up more after hearing his story. Men who hadn't spoken about the war in decades approached him afterward, thanking him. Some cried. Some simply sat beside him in silence. At one talk, a younger veteran, Afghanistan, maybe Iraq, stood up during the Q&A. Do you think it was worth it? He asked. Jack paused. The air in the room shifted. No war is worth the lives it takes, Jack said quietly. But remembering, coming back to face what we left behind, that's worth everything. Because if we don't carry their names, no one will. The audience was silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. Eventually, the room echoed with it. Jack wasn't a hero. He didn't want to be. He just wanted Miguel's story to be told. Not as a statistic. Not as a name carved on a stone in some forgotten corner. But as a life. At home, Jack built a small shrine in his study, nothing elaborate. A framed photo. The wooden cross he'd carved a second copy of. The tiger amulet from an. And a candle he lit every year on the anniversary of Miguel's disappearance. Every year, he wrote a letter to Miguel in his journal. Still here, hermano. I planted tomatoes this spring. You always hated them. Elena's kids are growing fast. I told them about you. They want to visit Vietnam one day. I hope you'd be proud of the man I've become. I'm proud of the man you were. Rest easy. I've got this part. The night he turned 75, Jack sat on his porch with a glass of whiskey, the California sky stretching wide above him. Elena joined him, handing him an envelope. What's this? Something I think you should read. Inside was a letter from the Department of Defense. Someone had submitted a new report to the MIA office. A retired Vietnamese doctor had come forward with records from a now-defunct mountain clinic. A patient treated in 1968. American. Mid-20s. Shrapnel injuries. Didn't give a full name. Just said, Miguel. He'd recovered enough to walk, then disappeared again, perhaps across the border, or into a remote community. The trail ended there. No body. No confirmation. But a sliver of truth. Jack smiled, his eyes damp. He made it, he said. Elena looked at him. You believe that? Jack nodded. I do. Maybe he lived a life we'll never know. Maybe he became someone new. Maybe he found peace before I ever did. He raised his glass. To Miguel. To Miguel, Elena echoed. In the stillness, with the stars blinking overhead, Jack felt the weight he'd carried for 5 decades finally ease, not vanish, but but soften into something he could hold without breaking. Grief had become memory. Memory had become legacy. And somewhere, in the vast unwritten spaces between war and peace, Miguel lived on. The following spring, Jack received a letter that made his hands tremble once again, this time, from a journalist. Her name was Lien Tran, a Vietnamese-American writer working on a book about American soldiers who returned to Vietnam. She had heard Jack speak at a veterans conference and had been moved by his story. But what caught her attention most was Miguel. "I believe I may have come across a reference to him," the letter said. "Not a name, but a story. From a village near the Laotian border. May I come speak with you?" They met at Jack's home, in his modest living room filled with old maps, sepia-toned photos, and the unmistakable scent of pipe tobacco and jasmine tea. Lien was young, no more than 30, with a soft voice and sharp mind. She carried with her a laptop, 2 notebooks, and a quiet reverence for stories older than her. "I've spent the last 4 years interviewing villagers in the border provinces," she explained. "In one, I met a woman who told me about a ghost soldier. A man who came from the jungle, wounded and silent. He had dark skin, kind eyes, and he taught her to write her name in English." Jack leaned forward, heart pounding. "She said he never spoke his real name, only called himself M. He stayed for 2 years. Helped build a water system. Taught her brother how to fix the radio. Then, he vanished again. Headed west." Jack's eyes glistened. 2 years. He lived. It seems so. The village elder still remembers him. They said he was deeply sad, often sat by the river at sunset, just watching. Jack could picture it. Miguel, quiet and thoughtful, 1,000 memories pressing behind his eyes. He could see him sitting on a rock, looking into the rushing water, wondering if anyone back home thought of him. "I want to find that village," Jack said. Lien smiled. "That's why I came." The next trip to Vietnam was different. This time, Jack wasn't alone. Lien coordinated the journey with care, connecting with local historians, organizing transportation, and even reaching out to anthropologists who had studied the remote border communities. They flew into Hanoi, then traveled south and west, eventually crossing into a region thick with forest and fog, the kind of place untouched by time. When they arrived at the village, Jack felt something shift. Not quite recognition, he'd never been there, but a kind of resonance, as if a piece of him had always been waiting in this place. The elder, a wiry man with a gentle face, welcomed them. Through Lien's translation, he told stories of a man who arrived in 1968, barefoot, limping, but with a warmth that made the children adore him. He built shelves for the schoolhouse. He helped bury the dead after a landslide. He carved animals from wood for the children. They called him "My Cam, Silent American." Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper, "Did he die here?" The elder shook his head. "One day, he packed a small bag. Said he had to go. No one saw him again." "Where?" The elder only shrugged. "Into the forest. Some say to Laos. Some say to die alone." They showed Jack the schoolhouse. It was falling apart now, but in the back room was a cabinet made from dark hardwood, still sturdy, still beautiful. "He made this," the elder said. Jack ran his fingers over the smooth grain. His knees buckled. He sat on the floor and cried, for the boy who built it, for the man who vanished, for the friend who lived in fragments and whispers. That evening, the village children performed a small dance in their honor. Jack sat beside Lien and watched, the fire casting flickers of light across his face. "I feel like I found him," he said softly. Lien nodded. "You found the part of him that survived." Jack thought about that all night. In the early hours before dawn, he walked down to the riverbank, just as the villagers said Miguel had done. The water moved swiftly, endlessly forward, like time. He took out the second copy of the wooden cross and a photo of Miguel, laminated now from where. He dug a small hole near the roots of a banyan tree and placed them inside. You lived, he whispered. You gave something back. You became part of this place. Thank you. When he turned to leave, he saw one of the village boys watching him. Jack smiled and offered the boy a coin, an old American quarter, worn smooth at the edges. The boy smiled back. "Come on," he said. Jack didn't understand the words, but he understood the heart behind them. Back in the States, Lean wrote her book. She dedicated an entire chapter to Miguel. She titled it, The Silent American. When it was published, Jack stood at the launch event, surrounded by veterans, scholars, and a few strangers who had read his story online. He spoke softly but clearly. War takes things from us. Friends, time, peace. But sometimes, it gives something back. Miguel was my brother. Not by blood, but by bond. I thought I lost him forever. But I found him in stories. In the people he touched. In the hope he left behind. He held up the book. This is how we remember. This is how we heal. The audience rose to their feet. Jack wasn't a young man anymore. His steps were slower. His eyes tired. But in that moment, he stood taller than he had in years. He had found what he came looking for. And in doing so, he'd given others the courage to search, too. The months passed gently after the book's release, like leaves floating downstream, steady, inevitable, filled with subtle change. Jack returned to his routines, tending his small garden, walking each morning with his neighbor's dog, and keeping up a stream of letters with fellow veterans across the country. But something inside had shifted forever. He was no longer just a man looking back. He had become a keeper of stories. Letters began to arrive, handwritten, typed, even emailed. From soldiers who had lost comrades and never got to say goodbye. From Vietnamese men and women who had their own unspoken memories of the war. From children and grandchildren trying to understand what their parents had endured. One letter, from a woman named Anna in New Mexico, struck him deeply. My father fought in Vietnam. He never talked about it. We never knew what haunted him. After reading about Miguel, I asked him if he ever had a friend like that. He cried for the first time in my life. He told me about someone named Kenny. He thought no one would ever understand. Thank you for giving him permission to speak. Jack read it 3 times before placing it in a binder labeled, Letters to Miguel. Every story, every tear shed, every truth finally spoken, they all belonged to Miguel's legacy now. Elena noticed the change in him too. He smiled more. He called more often. He took his grandson, Lucas, to the library and checked out books on Vietnam, not just the war, but the people, the food, the music. This is what it really looked like, he would say, pointing to photos of rice paddies and busy street markets. Not just gunfire. There were kites and bicycles and lanterns. Lucas listened, wide-eyed, as Jack told him stories, not just about firefights and survival, but about Miguel teaching him Spanish slang, about the time they traded a case of Coca-Cola for a chicken, about how Miguel once risked his life to carry a Vietnamese child to safety. You would have liked him, Jack said. He had a big laugh. And he always gave me the bigger half of the candy bar. Lucas looked up. Was he scared? Jack nodded. All the time. We all were. But Miguel, he still did the right thing. That's what makes someone brave. The boy was quiet for a moment. I want to be brave like that, he said. Jack smiled, brushing his hand over Lucas's hair. Then remember people like him. Tell their stories. The seed of remembrance was now planted in the next generation. One summer afternoon, Jack visited a local high school to speak to students about the war. He stood before a room full of teens, most of whom had never heard about the Vietnam War in detail. He spoke plainly. Not about politics or tactics, but about people. About how war is never truly won. About how it echoes through time, shaping the lives of those who return, and those who never do. He told them about Miguel. He showed them the photo. The letter. The wooden cross. The amulet. And then, he asked them a question. Who do you carry with you? Not just in memory, but in your heart. A friend? A relative? Someone who showed you how to live. There was silence at first. Then one student raised her hand. My uncle, she said. He was in Iraq. He never talks about it. But I know he hurts. I think about him all the time. Another hand went up. My older brother died of an overdose. He was my best friend. I carry him. And another. My mom escaped Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge. She lost her whole family. I carry them. Even though I never knew them. Jack stood there, listening as more and more voices rose. He realized something beautiful was happening. These weren't stories of war. They were stories of love. Of loss, yes, but also of hope. This was what Miguel had given him, a way to turn silence into legacy. Back home that night, Jack sat in his study. He lit the candle at Miguel's shrine and wrote one last letter. Brother. I want you to know, you live on. Not just in me, but in all of them. In every person who hears your story. In every student who learns what real courage is. I thought I was looking for you. But maybe I was really looking for myself. You helped me find him. You saved me again, Miguel. Rest easy, hermano. You're home. He folded the letter, placed it in the small wooden box on the shrine, and blew out the candle. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees. The night was cool, and the stars were bright. He walked out to the porch, sat down in his old chair, and looked up at the sky. He no longer feared the dark. Because he knew someone was watching, somewhere in the vastness. And that was enough. Autumn arrived with golden leaves drifting down from the trees, a slow, quiet reminder of time's passing. Jack's steps had grown slower now, his hands a bit more unsteady, but his mind was sharp, his memory vivid, and his purpose clearer than ever. He decided it was time to take the next step, to give Miguel a place in the world that others could visit, touch, and remember. He called Elena one morning. I want to start a memorial, he said. For Miguel? She asked. For all of them, Jack replied. But yes. For him first. She didn't need convincing. They began by reaching out to the local city council, proposing a small public garden dedicated to soldiers missing in action. A quiet place with trees and benches, perhaps a plaque or two, something that would endure beyond their lifetimes. They called it the Garden of the Unreturned. Jack contributed the first items, Miguel's laminated photo, a replica of the wooden cross, and the tiger amulet, now resting under glass. He also included a copy of the letter, the one that had started everything. The community responded in ways Jack never anticipated. Veterans came from all over to share stories. Families brought photos of loved ones lost in wars stretching back to Korea, even World War II. Artists volunteered to carve names into stone. Local children painted tiles with messages of hope and remembrance. What began as a modest idea became something larger, a living memorial, growing with each story shared, each memory spoken aloud. Jack often visited, sometimes alone, sometimes with Elena and Lucas. He would sit quietly on one of the benches beneath a maple tree and watch as others wandered through, reading, remembering. It was one afternoon in late October, the air crisp and full of wood smoke, when Jack met someone unexpected. A woman, maybe in her 60s, with short gray hair and a weathered leather satchel, approached the garden. She walked slowly, reverently, and paused at Miguel's photo. Jack noticed her hands trembling. "Did you know him?" he asked gently, stepping closer. She turned. Her eyes were glassy but kind. "I think he might have saved my brother." Jack's breath caught. "Tell me." She introduced herself as Marisol Ortega. Her brother had been a helicopter pilot in 1968, stationed near the border with Laos. His bird went down during a medevac mission, and he was rescued by a dark-skinned soldier, who guided him through the jungle for 3 days. "My brother always talked about him," she said. "Said he barely spoke. Just pointed and signaled. Got him to a village where he was airlifted. He never got the man's name, just called him the Phantom. He said the man had kind eyes and looked like he carried 1,000 sorrows." Jack's eyes filled with tears. "Did he survive?" he asked. Marisol nodded. "He died of cancer 10 years ago. But he told that story every birthday. Said it was the day he was born again." Jack reached into his coat and pulled out a small laminated photo of Miguel. "Was this him?" Marisol gasped. "That's him. That's the man." They stood in silence, hearts pounding, the world briefly suspended in stillness. After a long moment, Jack whispered, "He lived. He helped. Even after the war broke him, he gave." Marisol placed her hand gently on Jack's arm. "Thank you for keeping his memory alive." It was more than validation. It was revelation. It meant Miguel hadn't just disappeared into the fog of war, he'd become something larger. A protector. A guide. A quiet force of good in a world torn by chaos. The news spread quickly. Newspapers picked up the story. A local news channel ran a feature. Jack found himself at the center of a growing wave of public attention, not something he sought, but something he welcomed for Miguel's sake. He was invited to Washington, D.C., to speak at the National POW, MIA Recognition Day ceremony. Elena went with him. She held his hand on the steps of the Capitol as he faced a crowd of hundreds. Families, veterans, children, politicians, all listening. Jack spoke from the heart. "I came here today not as a hero," he said, "but as a friend. A man who lost someone, and found him again, not in body, but in memory, in legacy, in the lives he touched without ever asking for thanks. We talk about war in numbers. Killed. Wounded. Missing. But every number is a name. And every name is a story." Miguel's story was one of courage, quiet kindness, and sacrifice. He paused, his voice catching. "I never got to bury him. But I carry him now. In my bones. In my heart. And through this garden, through all of you who remember, he lives." The audience rose in thunderous applause. Afterward, an elderly woman in a wheelchair approached him. She wore a gold star pin. "My husband never came back," she said. "But your story gave me peace. I've spent 60 years wondering. Maybe he helped someone too. Maybe that's how we heal, not by forgetting, but by believing they mattered." Jack bent down and took her hand. "They did," he said. "They still do." As the sun set over the Potomac that evening, Jack stood at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. He traced the names, row after row, until he found the one he had etched into memory all those years ago. Miguel A. Ramirez. The name wasn't officially confirmed. But that day, someone had placed a photograph beneath the panel. The same photo Jack had laminated. Below it, someone had written in careful handwriting. "We remember you. We carry you." Jack stood in silence, the wind gently tugging at his coat. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He had finally brought Miguel home. Winter came early that year, brushing frost across the windows of Jack's home and laying a stillness over the town like a soft white blanket. The garden of the unreturned remained open year-round, and Jack continued to visit, bundled in his heavy coat, the cold air reddening his cheeks but never touching the warmth he carried inside. The quiet season gave him space to reflect. Alone in his study, surrounded by letters, photos, and memories, he began to write, not just more letters to Miguel, but something more complete. A memoir. Not for publication. Not for fame. But for Lucas. For Elena. For anyone who would one day want to know why an old man kept a shrine in his home and tended a public garden with the care of a father. He titled it, One Lost, One Found. He wrote about growing up in the Midwest, about being drafted, about the first time he saw Miguel laugh, real, belly-deep laughter, the kind that could cut through any darkness. He wrote about the firefights, the rain that never stopped, the terror of the jungle at night. And then he wrote about the moment Miguel disappeared. The days after. The guilt. The silence. The weight of not knowing. He didn't shy away from the pain. But he always circled back to the light. I didn't find him in a grave, he wrote. I found him in the faces of those he helped. In the words of strangers who carried pieces of him without knowing. I found him in me, and through him, I found myself. Lucas would often come sit beside Jack while he wrote. What are you writing today, Grandpa? He'd ask. Jack would smile. A story about being brave. Like superheroes? Jack chuckled. Exactly. But the kind that don't wear capes. The kind that carry their pain and still keep going. Sometimes Lucas would draw while Jack typed, crayon images of soldiers and helicopters, of gardens and stars. Jack saved every one. One drawing in particular stood out. It was a picture of two men standing beside a tree, holding hands. One wore a uniform. The other had long hair and brown skin. Above them, Lucas had written in block letters. Jack and Miguel. Forever friends. Jack framed it and placed it on the wall beside the photo. Winter turned to spring, and the garden bloomed with new life. Community members planted bulbs donated by families from all over the country, daffodils, tulips, lilies. Each one a small act of remembrance. Jack had started something, and it had grown beyond him. But life, as it always does, brought new turns. One morning, Jack collapsed while walking back from the garden. The diagnosis was quick, heart failure. He was stable, but the doctors told Elena gently that his time was growing short. When she told him, Jack simply nodded. I've had more time than I thought I would, he said. And I got to say goodbye. Elena wept, but Jack only smiled. Promise me something, he said, gripping her hand. Keep the garden alive. Keep telling his story. She promised. In the hospital, Jack received a steady stream of visitors. Veterans. Students. Local reporters. Even Lean, the journalist who had started him on his journey, flew in to see him. You gave voice to a generation, she said softly. And you gave peace to a man who deserved to be remembered. Jack took her hand. You helped me find him. On his last night, Jack asked for one thing, to hear music. Not somber or slow, but joyful. Elena played an old cassette of Miguel's favorite songs, Latin rhythms, smooth guitar, rich vocals. Songs they used to listen to in the barracks, when the world still felt open and full of dreams. Jack closed his eyes. In his mind, he was young again. The jungle was behind him. The sky was clear. And beside him, Miguel stood with that same crooked smile and laughing eyes. We made it, hermano, Jack whispered. We made it all the way home. He passed in his sleep, peaceful, hand in Elena's. The funeral was small but beautiful. Military honors. A folded flag. A reading of his favorite passage from his memoir. At the garden, a new plaque was placed beneath the maple tree where he often sat. It read. In memory of Jack Miller. Soldier. Storyteller. Seeker. He carried the ones he loved, and in doing so, helped the rest of us carry on. Dedicated by the friends, family, and strangers who were changed by his journey. Miguel's photo was placed beside it, framed now not by silence, but by 1,000 voices who remembered. Lucas, standing with his mother, held up one of his drawings. "That's Grandpa," he said proudly. "And that's his best friend." Elena knelt beside him. "Do you know what Grandpa always said?" Lucas nodded. "We carry them." "Yes," she whispered. "And now, we carry him too." The wind blew softly through the garden, rustling the leaves, brushing petals from branches to ground like blessings from above. And somewhere beyond that sky, two friends, bound by war, separated by fate, reunited through love, stood side by side once again. Elena took over the stewardship of the garden with quiet strength. Though grief sat heavily on her shoulders, she wore it with dignity, like a well-folded flag, solemn and proud. Every Sunday, she would walk the winding path Jack once tended, brushing fallen leaves off the stone benches, lighting a candle beneath his plaque, and watering the flowers he loved. Volunteers had begun to arrive without asking, neighbors, veterans, students, each one remembering how Jack had made them feel seen. But the garden was more than just a tribute now. It had become a movement. A foundation was created in Jack's name, the Miguel and Jack Legacy Project. Its mission was simple: preserve the memory of those missing in action through community storytelling, public art, and youth education. Elena and Lucas became its first ambassadors. They visited schools, military bases, even community centers in cities far from home. At each stop, Elena told the story, not just of Jack's journey, but of how a bond forged in war could ripple across generations, transforming pain into purpose. Lucas, now 10 years old, often stood beside her with quiet pride. He would show the drawing he'd made of Jack and Miguel and tell the audience what it meant to carry someone. "It means," he'd say, "you don't forget. Even when they're gone, they're with you. And you try to be brave like they were." The words were simple. But the impact was profound. In San Diego, a young Marine in the crowd broke down in tears. In Chicago, a Vietnamese-American teenager stood up and shared, for the first time, how his grandfather had been a South Vietnamese soldier who lost his entire unit in 1972. In New York, a retired nurse brought Elena a photo of a wounded soldier she treated during the Tet Offensive. "I never knew his name," she said. "But maybe your story will help me find his family." The garden in Jack's hometown was no longer the only one. Similar memorial spaces began appearing across the country, inspired by Jack's words and Miguel's courage. In New Mexico, a community center added a mural featuring soldiers of all backgrounds standing together under a banyan tree, their shadows blending into one. In rural Georgia, a high school planted a field of wildflowers for every local soldier who never returned. And in Hanoi, with help from the Vietnamese government and local veterans, a small grove of trees was planted near the site of Miguel's last known mission. At the foot of one tree, a stone marker read, "To the ones who disappeared, but were never forgotten. Peace between souls knows no borders." Lean, the journalist, visited the grove and sent Elena a photograph. Elena printed it and placed it on the garden shrine, next to the original picture of Miguel and Jack. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon and the sky turned a soft shade of lavender, Elena sat alone at the garden. She held a worn leather-bound journal, Jack's memoir, now printed and bound by a local publisher. She opened to a page near the middle, her eyes landing on one of Jack's most cherished reflections. There is a myth that says a person dies twice, once when they take their last breath, and again when their name is spoken for the last time. Miguel will never truly die. Not if I have anything to say about it. She closed the journal and pressed it to her heart. A small voice broke the silence. "Grandma." It was Lucas, holding a lantern he had made in art class. Painted on it was a simple design, two soldiers beneath a tree, sharing a meal. I want to leave this here, he said. Elena nodded. They placed it by the base of the tree. As the lantern glowed softly in the twilight, Elena whispered a quiet prayer, one of gratitude, of release, of remembrance. I hope you see this, Jack. I hope you and Miguel are somewhere together. Laughing. Whole. At peace. A soft wind rustled the leaves, carrying her words into the branches, into the sky, into whatever lay beyond. For a moment, the garden seemed to glow. There were no ghosts here, only love. As the years passed, the garden became a place not only of remembrance but of celebration. It hosted school field trips, military reunions, and even quiet weddings beneath the tree where Jack and Miguel's plaque stood. What had once been born of grief now blossomed into something profoundly hopeful, a sanctuary for the living as much as a tribute to the dead. Elena, though older now, remained its steadfast guardian. Her silver hair tied in a soft bun, her hands wrinkled but firm, she was known in town simply as, the lady who keeps the memory. Every spring, she led a planting day where new flowers were added in honor of names still unaccounted for. Every autumn, she led a candle vigil at dusk, lanterns floating into the sky in silence. Lucas grew taller. Quieter. But never outgrew the story. By the time he reached high school, he had begun giving his own speeches, nervous at first, but increasingly assured. He spoke of service, of memory, and of the legacy passed down to him like a torch. When classmates groaned about history homework, he reminded them gently that these weren't just lessons in a book. They were real people, he'd say. And one of them saved my grandfather. One particular summer, Lucas applied for a scholarship sponsored by a national veterans organization. In his essay, he wrote, "War leaves holes. Some never close. But stories, true stories, can stitch us back together. My grandfather didn't just find a friend. He helped a nation remember someone who might have been lost forever. I want to keep that thread going. I want to make sure no one forgets." He won the scholarship. And with it, he traveled to Vietnam, retracing his grandfather's steps, with Elena's blessing and the journal tucked safely in his backpack. The trip was transformative. In Saigon, he met children who had never heard the full story of the American War, as they called it. In Quang Tri, he met elders who remembered hiding in bunkers while the sky burned. But he also met veterans, both American and Vietnamese, who embraced each other, cried together, and planted trees side by side. At the grove near Miguel's last known location, Lucas stood beneath the same canopy that had once hidden fear and violence. Now, it shielded orchids and birdsong. He read aloud from Jack's journal. The group stood in silence, some with eyes closed, some weeping. It was a moment of healing, not just for Lucas, but for everyone there. When he returned home, Lucas brought with him a small bag of soil from the grove. He placed it carefully beneath Miguel's photo in the garden. "Now it's all connected," he said. "Here and there. Past and present." The Miguel and Jack Legacy Project continued to expand. It hosted an annual storytelling contest for high school students. It partnered with universities to digitize and preserve letters from veterans. It created a mobile exhibit, a converted bus filled with artifacts, audio recordings, and interactive timelines, that traveled across the country. Everywhere it went, people stepped aboard and left changed. They cried. They remembered. They wrote their own stories. Some left names scribbled on sticky notes, tucked into a memory wall, brothers, fathers, friends. Some left prayers. Others, simple thanks. The project became a ripple, then a wave, proof that remembrance, when nurtured with love, could grow into something transformative. Elena never remarried. She said she didn't need to. "I still talk to Jack every day," she often told visitors. "He and Miguel are still with us. You just have to listen." Sometimes, in the soft rustling of leaves, she felt them answer. On the 20th anniversary of Jack's passing, a statue was unveiled in the garden. It was bronze, life-sized, depicting two soldiers walking side by side, one reaching out, the other looking ahead. No weapons. No helmets. Just two men, etched in eternal movement, one carrying the other in spirit. The plaque beneath it read, "Brothers in the fire, friends in the light." This garden was born from loss. It endures through memory. And it lives because two men chose love over silence. As the sun set that evening, a crowd gathered. Lucas, now in his 30s, stood on the podium. A teacher, a father, a storyteller. "I never met Miguel," he began. "But I feel like I know him. My grandfather gave me that gift, not just of his story, but of his heart." He looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight, old, young, families of all colors and backgrounds. "We all carry someone," he said. "We carry their dreams. Their sacrifices. Their voices. And if we carry them well, we make the world they left better than the one they knew." The wind blew gently through the trees. Lanterns floated once again into the sky. And the garden stood, silent, strong, eternal. The story of Jack and Miguel began to reach beyond American borders. Documentaries were filmed. Books translated. And in places that had once been divided by war, the tale of their friendship became a bridge. In Hanoi, a university added their story to a course on peacebuilding and memory. In Berlin, a traveling exhibit included their letters as part of a global dialogue on reconciliation. And in a quiet corner of a Tokyo museum, beneath a glass case, lay a copy of Jack's journal, open to a page where he wrote, "The battlefield is not only where we fight others. Sometimes, it's where we fight ourselves. Miguel helped me survive that second war, the one that no one else saw." Back in the US, Lucas continued his work with the Legacy Project, now serving as its executive director. But even as the organization expanded, he remained grounded in his roots, returning every month to the original garden, tending it with the same quiet reverence Jack once had. One spring morning, he brought his daughter, Sophie, for the first time. She was 6. Curious, bright-eyed, full of questions. "Who's this, Daddy?" she asked, pointing to Miguel's photo. "That's someone Grandpa Jack loved very much." "Did he love him like a brother?" Lucas smiled. "Exactly like that." "And what happened to him?" Lucas knelt beside her, taking her hand. "He got lost in a place far away, during a scary time. Grandpa tried to find him for many, many years. And when he couldn't find his body, he found his story instead. He helped the world remember." Sophie blinked. "So now we remember too?" "Yes, sweetie. That's our job." She was quiet for a moment, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a single daisy. "I want to give him this." She placed it beside the plaque, her small fingers brushing the worn stone with the kind of care children seem born knowing. Lucas felt tears rise in his throat, but he didn't wipe them away. He let them come. Because the story wasn't ending, it was continuing. One generation passing the torch to the next. And in a world that still bore wounds, still wrestled with memory and conflict, that torch mattered. Later that week, Lucas was invited to speak at a conference on intergenerational healing. He stood before a packed auditorium of activists, educators, and survivors from all over the world. He spoke of war, yes, but more than that, he spoke of friendship. Of how two young men had met in a jungle, watched over each other, and made a silent promise that not even death could break. "I think we underestimate the power of being remembered," he told them. "Of being known. My grandfather spent half his life trying to bring his friend home. And though he never found his body, he found something else, he found Miguel's light. And when he did, he lit a path for the rest of us." He paused. "I believe every name we carry is a seed. And if we plant it with care, it will bloom into something that can change the world." The room was silent. Then, one by one, people stood and applauded, not out of routine, but out of respect. Out of resonance. Afterward, a woman from South Korea approached Lucas. "My father was in the war too," she said. "But he never spoke of it. Your story helped me understand him a little better." A young man from Liberia added, "We lost so many. I want to build a garden like yours back home." And an elderly man from the Czech Republic wept as he said, "I didn't know stories like this still existed." Lucas thanked them all. But later that night, sitting alone on a hotel balcony, he opened his notebook and wrote a letter, not for publication, not for work, just for him. "Dear Grandpa, I hope you're watching. Today, someone halfway across the world said Miguel's name. And tomorrow, someone else will too. You were right. Stories don't die. Thank you for showing me how to carry them. Love. Lucas." Back at the garden, the tree that once stood bare was now thick with branches. Children played near it. Elders sat in its shade. Travelers took photos. Teachers gave lessons. It had become a living symbol, not of war, but of what comes after. And every year, on the date of Jack's passing, a small ceremony was held. Not formal. Not grand. Just candles, music, and shared silence. People would gather, read aloud names from a growing list, and tell each other. We carry them. Not because they had to. But because they chose to. 10 years later, the world had changed in ways that neither Jack nor Miguel could have imagined. Conflicts had flared and subsided. New wars, new wounds. But also, new voices, rising with purpose. A new generation, asking questions not just about history, but about humanity. And always, there was the garden. Now officially called the Garden of Carried Names, it had become a place of pilgrimage. People came not only to honor soldiers but to reckon with their own stories, immigrants tracing fractured family lines, children searching for grandparents they never met, even veterans from other wars seeking silence and understanding. On a mild October afternoon, a man named Nguyen Van Tom arrived from Vietnam. He was in his 80s, his steps careful but determined. A retired teacher and former soldier in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. He walked with the aid of a cane carved from mahogany and held tightly to a thin, leather satchel. He had read about the garden in a translated article his granddaughter brought him. For days, he had not slept. There was a name he hadn't spoken aloud in over 50 years, a name he thought lost with the wind, until he read Jack's story. At the garden's center, he stood before Miguel's plaque, his eyes scanning every word with reverence. A volunteer approached gently. "Would you like a moment alone?" Nguyen nodded. He knelt, slowly, and opened his satchel. Inside was a faded photograph, 3 young men, arms draped over each other, covered in sweat and dust. One of them was Miguel. Nguyen placed it beside the plaque and whispered in Vietnamese, then English. "I remember you. You helped me once. Gave me water. Carried me from a field. I never knew your name. I never thanked you." He sat there for hours. Later, when Lucas arrived and the two spoke, Nguyen pulled out a notebook, pages and pages of memories he had recorded since the war. Descriptions of battles. Faces without names. Regrets etched in long paragraphs. But woven through it all, a thread of hope. "I never thought anyone would care about these," Nguyen said. "But maybe they're part of the garden now." Lucas took the notebook and promised, they'll be part of the legacy. From that meeting, the Voices Across Borders program was born, an international oral history initiative that invited people from both sides of past conflicts to speak, record, and heal. Vietnamese veterans began contributing their stories alongside American ones. South Koreans and North Koreans shared family testimonies through intermediaries. Children of refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, Sudan, came forward, wanting to leave something behind. The garden became a library, not of books, but of hearts. Elena, now in her late 80s, watched all this unfold from her porch. She no longer tended the garden daily, but her spirit was in every flower bed, every whispered story. On her final visit, Lucas pushed her wheelchair along the main path. Sophie, now 16, walked beside them. "I still hear him sometimes," Elena said softly. "In the wind. In the laughter of children. He's not gone." Lucas placed his hand over hers. "I know." They reached the base of the statue, Jack and Miguel, side by side. Beneath it, a new plaque had been added, quoting Jack's journal. "We carry them, because the world is heavy. But when we carry them together, it becomes light." Sophie took out her phone and snapped a photo. "I want to share this with my class," she said. "No one at school really talks about Vietnam. Or soldiers. Or any of it. But they should." Elena smiled, proud. "You'll do it right, baby. I know you will." When she passed away 2 months later, the memorial service was held in the garden. Hundreds came. Veterans in uniform. Teenagers with camera phones. Artists who had painted murals. Teachers who had used Jack's journal in their classrooms. People from as far as Kenya and Cambodia, Argentina and Armenia. Lucas gave the eulogy. "She taught me that love outlives war. That remembrance can rebuild what violence breaks. That every story matters, especially the ones that are almost forgotten." The next day, they planted a tree in her honor. A cherry blossom, symbol of renewal, fragility, and the beauty of brief things that leave deep imprints. Sophie gave a short speech. "My great-grandma told stories so people could heal. She taught me that we all carry someone. I carry her now." The garden bloomed brighter than ever. Its message no longer whispered, but sung. Across continents. Across languages. Across generations. The 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War approached, a milestone that stirred long-buried emotions across the country and around the world. Governments planned ceremonies. Museums prepared exhibits. News outlets began releasing retrospectives. But in the quiet corners of homes and hearts, people simply remembered. In the days leading up to the anniversary, the Garden of Carried Names prepared too. A full week of events was scheduled: poetry readings, panel discussions, interfaith blessings, and open mic story circles. Volunteers arrived from all 50 states. Veterans came in caravans. Students camped nearby, eager to help. Lucas walked the garden every morning with his coffee, checking the paths, greeting visitors, pausing to kneel before names he'd come to know like family. He no longer felt weighed down by the stories. He carried them now like stones in his pocket, reminders, not burdens. On the morning of the main ceremony, the air was cool and golden. Thousands had gathered. Television crews quietly set up on the edges. A large stage had been erected beneath the statue of Jack and Miguel. Lucas stood behind the curtain, heart pounding. He wasn't nervous about speaking. He was nervous about doing justice to what the day meant, not just to him, but to everyone who had carried this story forward. When he stepped onto the stage, the applause faded quickly. People were listening. "I never served in a war," he began. "But I inherited one." He paused. "My grandfather Jack never stopped carrying the war he left behind. But he didn't let it ruin him. He used it. He turned it into a mission of love." He looked around at the crowd, faces of every color, age, and background. "Miguel and Jack showed us that friendship can survive anything, even death, even silence. And today, 50 years later, their story still echoes. Because memory is an act of love. And love, when shared, becomes legacy." He stepped aside. Music played, an original composition created by Vietnamese and American musicians, blending bamboo flutes with strings, drums with gongs. It rose like mist and sunlight together. One by one, people approached the stage. Some read letters. Some wept. A few sang. And then, in a moment no one expected, a former North Vietnamese soldier stepped forward. He was in his 70s. His translator stood beside him. Together, they shared a simple truth. I was your enemy once. But now, I am your brother. The crowd stood in silence, then rose in a spontaneous, thunderous ovation. Veterans hugged. Strangers held hands. And in that moment, the past felt both distant and impossibly near. After the ceremony, Sophie led a youth tour through the garden. She pointed out the tree planted for Elena, the daisy bed dedicated to children lost in conflicts, the photo of Nguyen Van Tom holding Miguel's snapshot. These aren't just memories, she said. They're maps. They help us find our way. One small boy tugged at her sleeve. Will you ever stop telling this story? Sophie knelt and looked him in the eye. Never, she said. As the sun began to set, lanterns were once again prepared, now a tradition, a ritual of soft release. Each person who attended was invited to write a name, a memory, or a prayer on a slip of paper and place it inside. Lucas stood beside his daughter, watching hundreds of lanterns float into the evening sky. The horizon glowed like embers, quiet and sacred. Jack's photo, smiling and young, rested beneath a spotlight by the statue. Beside him, Miguel, forever 22, forever brave. Lucas whispered. We found him, Grandpa. Not the body. But the meaning. He smiled. He came home. And in that stillness, with the sky aflame in gold and purple, you could almost hear the footsteps of two soldiers walking side by side, no longer afraid, no longer lost. Just remembered. And loved. The story of Jack and Miguel is not just about war. It's not even just about friendship. It's about what we do with pain, how we choose to carry it, how we transform it, how we refuse to let it harden us. Jack could have buried the past. He could have turned away from the memories, from the guilt, from the haunting silence of unanswered questions. Many did. Many still do. But instead, he chose to walk back into the jungle, not with a weapon, but with hope. He returned to the place that broke him, looking not for vengeance, but for connection. For meaning. For Miguel. And through that journey, he uncovered a truth far more profound than any medal or mission ever promised, that in the face of devastation, the only true victory is love. Love that endures through decades. Love that inspires new generations to ask, to listen, to remember. Love that says, you mattered. You still do. We all carry someone. We all walk through our own jungles. But if we carry each other, if we plant seeds of memory and water them with care, then even the most broken ground can bloom again. Let this story be a reminder, not just of what was lost, but of what can still be found. Even now. Especially now. Because the world still needs gardens. And the names we carry still deserve to be spoken. Let us speak them. Let us carry them forward. Let us never forget.